Let's start by going back to what actually happened at the time when these statements were first made. I never said whether they were there or not. Due to the nature of my character, I simply believed that we should strive for the truth in any question. What bothered me primarily? Two facts. The first is the absence, in recent years or even decades, of a space transportation system, engines, rockets, spacecraft, life support systems that would have allowed for this type of missions to the moon, even for the United States. Frankly, it's strange. Currently, everything is being created anew, and tasks are being set by Trump first and now by Biden for the implementation of a lunar mission, when such a lunar mission was already accomplished by the United States in the 1960s, as it is claimed. So, if it has already been done, why repeat it after so many years, while recreating anew everything necessary for the realization of this mission? A colossal amount of money from the United States budget is being spent on this. It's a strange story. The second thing that puzzled us the most about this issue was the behavior of the astronauts themselves. Because when we watched the footage of American missions to the moon, we were amazed at how easily astronauts jumped out of the spacecraft after splashdown. In essence, in such an exhausting journey, they spent several days in a state of weightlessness, far away from the Earth. And we compared it with the condition in which our cosmonauts came out of our spacecraft after a similar in-duration mission. They were assisted, underwent a long period of rehabilitation, medical examinations, and so on. What is this? Some kind of magic super pill, or simply there was no such physical load that was claimed during these space missions? So, this topic simply interested me. I never claimed that they weren't there, but I wanted to obtain evidence that they were there. That's all. A very straightforward question. At that time, while still working in the government, I approached the federal space agency Roscosmos, which was still an agency back then, not a state corporation, with a request to provide the necessary documentary evidence to confirm the information that they were there. Unfortunately, it turns out that the Russian, and therefore, Soviet space industry doesn't have any documentary evidence. The only evidence is a book written by various authors and the memoirs of a cosmonaut Leonov, who enjoyed interacting with American astronauts. And he claimed that they were there. But when I asked him myself, may he rest in peace, how do you know this? He said, they themselves told me about it. Well, you know, I say it again, with all my deepest respect for our space veterans, our cooperation in space, and the United States, you can't believe anything in this life. Especially now, in a period when suddenly the ardency has been exposed in the relations between states, and we see that the United States and other countries have deceived us for many, many years, for example, in the same situation with Donbass. If they deceived us in one thing, why wouldn't they deceive us in another? Maybe it was some kind of special operation. But to figure that out, we need to clarify everything and obtain documentary evidence proving that such missions were indeed carried out. Therefore, in this regard, I issued appropriate instructions to our scientific institutes within Roscosmos when I worked in this industry for 4 years. Unfortunately, they also did not bring us anything interesting or useful in that regard. Why was this important to us? It's not just satisfying simple curiosity. You see, we are preparing a mission to the moon. This year, the Luna 25 spacecraft is scheduled to fly. We plan to send an expedition there in the future. But, certainly, it would be nice to learn something from former partners about their experience, how they managed to do it many, many years ago. And now it turns out that there is no one to learn from and nothing to learn. What kind of evidence do we need? We need tangible evidence, documentary evidence, not videos, not movies, not books, not words about them being there, but real facts that will truly be used in our rocket and space industry to essentially move forward. You see, the point is this: such questions should not be answered with a simple, "You are a fool," but with some detailed response.
Again, I emphasize, documentary evidence is needed.
Either the Americans have this evidence or they don't, and they should provide it. If there are such questions in society, in the scientific community, they do exist. Why do I have grounds to think so?
Let's recall an initiative called the Strategic Defense Initiative.
It was voiced during Ronald Reagan's presidency and started being implemented. They announced some space-based super complexes, laser guns that were supposed to shoot down Soviet ballistic missiles. And you know what's most interesting? We fell for it back then. And when we talk about the Buran spacecraft, for me, it's actually a tragedy because I saw what condition Buran number 2 was in, which was 95% ready for launch. But the program was halted in the early 1990s due to lack of funding. Everything was stopped, and it is still languishing in a semi-ruined hangar, now belonging not even to the Russian Federation but to some shady figures from Kazakhstan. In this regard, when we started to investigate, the Buran program itself appeared as part of a global and very expensive response by the USSR to that strategic defense initiative. But it turned out that there was no strategic defense initiative. It was a fake, cleverly crafted to make us go bankrupt, incur colossal expenses, and follow a dead-end technological path. And in the end, Buran is the only thing that was realized, and now it's a sad reminder of the former might of a great country. Therefore, we have a question here too. If we imagine that the United States sought a response, for example, to the magnificent, skillfully executed steps of the Soviet Union in space, starting from Yuri Gagarin's flight, then the first human spacewalk, the flights of several people in space, the first woman in space, the construction of orbital space stations, and much more, they had to find some kind of response. And they seemingly found their response. Whether they found it or not, that's what I want to know. And not just me, probably. And here arises the question again. Precisely by finding this response and presenting it, and having fooled, as they believe, the Soviet leadership abandoned their lunar program. And Sergei Pavlovich Korolyov, as you know, was developing a super heavy-class rocket. A huge rocket, an entire workshop, an entire factory was built in Samara to assemble this N-1 rocket. It flew 4 times, and all 4 times it was unsuccessful. It would lift off, but the engines couldn't be synchronized on that rocket. But back then, they didn't have these supercomputers they have now. In fact, this failure of the lunar program contributed a lot to Sergei Pavlovich Korolyov's passing. He simply couldn't bear it. His heart couldn't take it. And maybe his heart couldn't take it because of this fake? Perhaps there was no fake. Maybe it was excellent competition on the Americans' part. But let's just establish whether it was or wasn't. So many years have passed, and perhaps it's time to reveal the cards. That's why the only thing we claim is that we are just asking, give us the opportunity to understand whether it was or wasn't, and if it was, then how did you manage to do it? And if you did manage, then why can't you do it now? Why can't you repeat it now after so many decades? There will be no consequences anymore because the United States has already been congratulated on this remarkable achievement, and everyone was thrilled. Wow, they pulled it off. But if it hadn't happened, if we don't receive this data, then it would have an impact. But if we do receive this data, we'll say, well done, we doubted for no reason. Either way, I believe it is a matter of honor for them to make certain things provable so that people will trust them. In reality, they don't have such strong grounds for us to trust them in every aspect. They have often lied in the past, deceiving their opponents or competitors. However, I really hope that in this case, they haven't lied. I hope they haven't lied. But if they have, it's not good. When I headed Roscosmos for 4 years, I can say that the difference in budgets between us and NASA was 21 to 23 times. So it doesn't even make sense to compare them. That's why we tried to prioritize what was most important for our country. And to a greater extent, we prepared to finance the modernization of our nuclear missile shield, which was done after the successful test of Sarmat rocket, for which I was responsible and personally reported to the President. As for why they did it, firstly, any science, in one way or another, drives progress. Even when it comes to long-range missions that NASA carries out to distant planets in the solar system, it creates an entirely new technological reality. But the United States primarily contributes to the military space sector. Their dream is to deploy weapons in space, which is actually prohibited by international law, but they are doing it. And we have many questions about their spaceplane, what it's doing for months in space. Because it already serves as a nuclear weapon carrier. And we are preparing to defend against intercontinental ballistic missile strikes from Earth. It is quite possible that such a strike against us will come from space, and we are not even aware of it. Therefore, it is advantageous for Americans to create supposedly civilian projects under a commercial disguise, while in reality all of them end up in the Pentagon. Let me give you a simple example. When I started talking about the initiative to create a multi-satellite broadband internet orbital constellation, Starlink, currently being developed by SpaceX, as being a military component, everyone laughed at me. They said I didn't understand anything, that I was talking nonsense, accusing Elon Musk, and so on. But Elon Musk is a very smart person. If he takes on something, he understands perfectly well that he will achieve not one but multiple results. And what did we end up with? The entire Starlink system now operates for the armed forces of Ukraine, which is exactly what needed to be proven. It turns out I was right. And those who tried to mock me turned out to be idiots. That's why the United States, even when investing in so-called private civilian projects, always considers national defense and national aggression. This conclusion is very important. I'm saying this for those kind-hearted liberals who believe that everything we say is heresy. We are not speaking heresy. We are speaking the truth, as it exists in reality.
Well, perhaps current officials working at Roscosmos may argue with me.
I believe that in the conditions when we are currently fighting for survival against the so-called civilized world, our main resources should be dedicated to national defense and the development of technologies for either defense or dual-purpose applications, including in space. The moon is great, but what is there to do on the moon? It's clear that there's nothing to do on the moon. Extracting regolith and helium for rocket engines from there? That would require building an entire moon base. For a human to travel to Mars, it takes 9 months just one way, and only once every 2 years. You can't travel in a spacecraft for 9 months strapped to a seat, unable to even go to the bathroom.
You need to travel inside a space station.
And in order to launch, for example, only one spaceship not to Mars, but to the Moon, a super heavy-class rocket is needed. Actually, you need 2 rockets. One would launch the Lunar Ascent-Descent module, and the other would launch a spacecraft with cosmonauts. The rocket should have a payload capacity of at least 105 to 107 tons to low Earth orbit. The cost of such a launch, for example, would be approximately $1 billion for us, for just one rocket. Launching 2 rockets would cost $2 billion. The development of such a rocket would cost billions of dollars. It would be even more expensive for the Americans. Multiply that by 5. So, the question arises, to have 1 or 2 lucky individuals hopping around on the lunar surface, the country would have to allocate a colossal amount of money and burn it in this way. Yet, with that money, we could have created a satellite communications group or optical electronic reconnaissance or radar reconnaissance. You're asking me this question in vain. I think differently from those who advocate peace, friendship, and better understanding. In conditions of scarcity in a country with just over 140 million people on a vast territory, surrounded by adversaries and competitors, we really need to invest in defense, rather than discussing the moon. Luna 25 will be launched soon. It was practically ready when I was still in charge. It will land, take something, explore, and drill the regolith with its screw. Well, that's good. We need to develop automation. It is clear to everyone that today the special military operations have shown that modern warfare is drone warfare. The frontline Air Force cannot even approach the front line because they will be shot down. The Navy ships today are also high-value targets on radars. I apologize for saying such things, but this is the weaponry of the past war. Today, everything should be done with drones. Elon Musk himself argued with the Pentagon and said, "Give me the opportunity to launch an armed drone aircraft equipped with air-to-air missiles, and you try to compete with it using your manned aircraft. I'll shoot down any manned aircraft you have." He was 100% right. And I am right now when I say that we need to develop robotics, artificial intelligence, and create drones. Underwater, ground-based, aerial, and space-based. Because ultimately, reaching distant worlds can only be achieved through automation. A human simply cannot break out, cannot survive outside the geomagnetic field. Radiation or heavy particles that permeate all of space would kill them. So, all these stories are some unclear tales, to bring glad tidings to the poor. Once again, I say we need to develop modern technologies. Humans were necessary during the era of the first steps in space exploration because automation couldn't accomplish everything. We needed people who could follow instructions from the Mission Control Center, press the right buttons, perform certain actions, take photographs, drop things back to Earth, and so on. That's what we needed humans for. We have passed that stage. From my perspective, the era of manned spaceflight in low Earth orbit has already run its course. We simply need to acknowledge it, and someone should say it directly. Speaking from my experience, I believe that the International Space Station, as a permanently inhabited station, should be the last station in near-Earth orbit. Everything else should be automated stations serviced by cosmonauts. They arrive, install the instrument, activate it, and leave. If it breaks, they return, repair it, and leave again. There's no need to linger there for months. It's very costly. The life support system, rehabilitation system, and so on, require enormous resources. It's better to invest those resources in robotics. So, what do I want to say? Well, I think we don't always need to chase after the leader. The Americans are going back to the moon, so let's go to the moon too. Why? Currently, I lead the group of military advisors called Zarsky Volki, Royal Wolves. How does a wolf hunt? Does it run after its desired object? No. It anticipates where the object will go, where the prey will move, and it intercepts it precisely, taking it into its jaws.
We should also choose the shortest path, cut corners in space, and spend money wisely.
You asked a good question, actually. Because I can say that I once found myself in a tricky situation. I became the subject of ridicule and accusations, various memes, and so on. Do you remember the story?
In 2018, in August, there was a depressurization incident on one of our spacecraft on the ISS.
They found a so-called hole. Remember? It's not just a hole, of course, but, as we say, a technological opening. There were several drill attempts, 8, I think. Moreover, it was evident that the drilling was done in a zero-G environment, without support that is usually present on Earth. It was drilled by a person who had never held anything like that before in their hands, unlike any man's man who knows how to do it.
You could see the drills sliding on the metal. Only one hole was drilled all the way through, and one hit a rib.
That is, the person who did it didn't know the structure of the spacecraft. Well, from the very beginning, it was clear for us who did it. The Americans asked me. The deputy head of NASA, a highly respected person in our field, approached me and said, regardless of the investigation's results, which you are conducting, and I must say that a criminal case was already opened, please don't make it public, don't tell anyone about it. It will ruin our relationship in space. That's what I was told. Accordingly, I passed on this information to the necessary people, shared this information. And then I took all this, excuse the expression, crap flying from all the throwing devices, without the ability to share this information. And now I won't mention the surname of the person who did it, for the same reason that we still have some remnants of cooperation with NASA. Why should I spit on my own past? I just shared this case with you. The same thing happened in other cases, as I suspect, when our cosmonauts, who like to take some of their relatives with them to America, to Houston,
or when some of our cosmonauts in the past had their daughters studying somewhere in France and so on.
It must have been inconvenient for them to argue with their partners. They probably didn't want to say anything. And they would be the first ones to start getting upset. Currently, I am absolutely confident in our cosmonaut corps.
I know very well the commander of the corps, Oleg Kononenko.
He is a very level-headed person. I know the guys who were also involved in the Challenge project and many other things. But during the period of our friendship with the United States of America in the 1990s and the 2000s, many of us became so close. I say, we became so close that there was nowhere else to go. We became close, including, apparently, in financial terms. So what can you expect from them? Right now, I'm not talking about cosmonauts. I'm talking in general about the tremendous number of people who are personally involved and interested in this cooperation. Sometimes their personal interests were more important than national interests. As in the famous movie, you remember that joke.